Okay, I'm so happy that you're all here. So cool to see so many, well, I would say faces, but so many names on the screen. I'm very, very happy to introduce Kristin Hughes. And we were just talking about how this crisis also has its opportunities. For example, that we can host Kristin as a lecturer, which is super cool. I'm super excited. Um, yeah, without further ado, this is Kristin Hughes, all the way from Pittsburgh, and she will tell us a lot of cool things about collaborative design and community-based design, um, as you all know probably. So the floor is all yours.
Great, thank you. And thank you, everyone. This is just such an honor to talk with all of you today. And it's funny. I have such a love in my heart for the Netherlands. In 1998, I studied at the Rietveld, and then had a really nice relationship with TUE. I think it was 10 years ago. I was there for about two weeks teaching a workshop, and just absolutely love everything about Dutch design. So this was a real honor, and just a nice opportunity to be able to talk with you and tell you a little bit about my work. So thank you all for asking me to come here. And I'm going to share my screen. Josephine, if we get this right, it'll be a miracle. But so I thought that I would start off today by telling you a little bit about myself and a project that really inspired a lot of the work that I do today. And it is surrounded around this place called Latham Street Commons. And I'm going to kind of wrap up the talk by really going into a year and a half of developing this much larger concept for a program that we call the Night Owl Bakery. So about 10 years ago, a very, very large apartment building right behind my house burned down. And it was terrifying. Later, we found out that a man had actually taken his life in the fire and put a lot of people at risk. And I happened to be out on the sidewalk the morning of the fire and asked this older gentleman, gosh, what are they going to do with this place? And he said, I'll sell it to you for really cheap, and I'll throw in the vacant lot. And I have no idea what I was thinking, but just it kind of off the cuff, I said, okay, I'll buy it. And I was really determined to turn this tragic event into something hopeful. And I was thinking, what could be more hopeful than a community garden? So 10 years later, countless volunteer hours, many crowdfunding campaigns. This is now the Octopus Garden. And what's really special about having a garden behind your house is the opportunity to observe a place slowly changing over time. So some days you can look outside and there are, 20 to 40 kids using it as an outdoor classroom. Often I'll peek out my window. I'm sitting in my studio space now, and my window looks out over the garden. There's always neighbors that are having lunch or reading a book or, just engaging with the plants that are growing. Oftentimes you'll hear kids that are picking up the octopus tentacles and asking for weather updates and trying to see if the octopus will talk. Or, you bump into people and just understand some of the things that are really pressing on their mind. And I like to think of it that this is the collective action of a community that's made the space possible. And the garden got me thinking about ways that we could maybe replicate these efforts. And could this type of work act as a catalyst for other types of social change? I've lived in this community called Friendship in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for about 19 years. And I started to look really carefully at my own neighborhood and realized that within a mile of my house, there are so many people that are living in poverty that have so little. And I thought, we need to figure out how to improve this, that I don't need to go to China. I don't need to, travel very far to find ways that I can use design to improve my own community. So for the past few years, I've been working with an incredible group of people. I'd like to mention Mary Lou Arscott, who's the head of the School of Architecture, Tim Zach, who's at the Hines School. A number of us from Carnegie Mellon and the community came together to figure out, gosh, can we look for ways that we can promote community using some of the sort of learning from the Octopus Garden. And it's funny, right behind the garden, there's this parcel of land. They're surrounded by 19th century storage garages. And we asked the following question: how might we create a place where the community as a whole can discover new ways of living that work for them? And we gave it a name. It's called Latham Street Commons. It sits on the street, Latham Street. And these are the garages. And there's 27 of them. And they were likely used to store horse carriages. They've got perfectly flat rooftops. And in the blue area, those are the first set of garages that we started to think about developing. It's interesting in Pittsburgh. I live in a community that was owned, very, very large houses that had been owned by people that owned the steel mills. And then on streets like I live on that are row houses, that's where factory workers lived. And so you have these really beautiful alleyways that are not really accessed, like people don't use them for anything. They become heavy with litter and debris. So it was a really nice opportunity to figure out how to understand the life that lives in these alleyways and kind of bring it to life. So a little bit of context about Pittsburgh. The city, I think, is working really hard to help lift people out of poverty, but we also face a number of really great challenges. We have economic segregation. We don't have affordable childcare. There's very little access to quality after-school programs. The opportunities to skill up and earn a living wage is far and few for many. And all of these issues make it really difficult for many families to imagine a brighter future for themselves and the next generation. And, it's like, how do we begin to change this paradigm? And does design have a role in that? So we've been looking at this framework that's called the social determinants of health. Some of you might know that, but it started to help us understand all the factors that determine the health and well-being. So things like your education, your social status, your identity, your employment, and the quality of healthcare. And it's interesting when you think about sort of health behaviors, which has been a big focus, is thinking about health and well-being. But that's only 30% of what makes you up as a whole person. And you can imagine when communities that have few economic opportunities, terrible school systems, no health care or access to care, that they're really lacking a lot of these things that are going to determine their ability to have a healthy outcome in life. And this is where we started to think about ways that we could kind of understand how to embed principles around the social determinants of health into this place called Latham Street Commons. So I thought I would tell you a little bit about how we got started, which I think focuses a lot on the work that I do, and thinking about the role of community action-based design research. So first, we really knew that we needed to establish the trust of the community and figure out how to create conditions for change. Understand and leverage the natural resources and experiment with different ways that we could grow food and study the site conditions. So we all know that our community, like every community, comes with their own unique stories and set of values and identities. So in an effort to better understand these qualities, we started to host a series of informal events, prompting questions about the neighborhood's needs, their wants, and wishes. So we painted the outside of the garages with chalkboard paint. And every week we would add different questions. We would have different ways that people could write on these tags and tell us what they were experiencing on the day-to-day. We had a ton of responses. And so you can imagine, when you begin to look at this, collection of data, things that, of course, came up, like need more access to food, need access to places for food production, places for kids to be able to play and be safe, health services. But then a number of things that I think really surprised our team was the comments about isolation, loneliness, lack of connection to neighbors. And so these types of responses helped us frame a series of what we called kind of co-design sessions. And we sat down with neighbors. We worked out of the local daycare and began to ask them, like, what do they think this space could be? So here we have an opportunity for 27 little storage garages to become a microcosm of what a healthy community might be. And the ideas, I think, were sort of fascinating. So bubbling up a cafe where people could learn to cook, a big 1-hour timeout pod for parents that were at a breaking point with their child, dental screening for kids, game rooms for senior citizens, open gyms, etc. And there were not a lot of people that thought that we needed more fancy condos in the area. This particular neighborhood, I would say, is being gentrified. We have Google that's about 1 mile down the street, and it's changing really quickly, and there are a lot of people that are being left behind. And so we kept really emphasizing with the sort of vision for the Commons that we really wanted to create a place that everyone could access equally and have them be a part of how the system would grow. The other thing that we started to do was work with our local water company. Pittsburgh as a city has an absolutely terribly old infrastructure. So we have what they call combined sewer overflow. So when we get heavy rains, the system can't actually get the water out fast enough, so it backs up into all our basements and you get raw sewage and a lot of people get sick, and it's just a terrible problem. So we began doing these water walks and trying to understand the path of the rainwater and realized that the Latham Street Commons site sat at one of the most at-risk watersheds in our county. And it was a really tremendous opportunity to think about ways that we could capture rainwater. So we quickly learned that a very simple, inexpensive system impacted our failing combined sewer system. We like to call this sort of the method of direct experimentation. And we, through the relationship with the Octopus Garden, know a number of children in the community that came to help build this system. And you can imagine these are old olive containers, and many adults cannot fit in them. So we needed these young little hands to go in to fasten up all of the connections. Building with 20 recycled olive containers, a bunch of PVC pipes, a couple hoses, and a water pump. This is what we called one communicating vessel. And we learned that we could capture a ton of rainwater at Latham Street. And that provided this opportunity for us to think about ways that we would start growing food. And we wanted to do this in a way that was both cost effective. So how do we look at different recycled or upcycled containers and really put a huge set of constraints on what we could use and how we could teach the community about growing their own food. And we hosted a series of events where every generation was invited to be a part of the experience of growing and building an urban farm together. And we asked people to come in to help and offer their sort of free labor in exchange for coupons that they could bring back in August when the food was ready to be harvested. And really trying to emphasize the notion of and the importance of alternative economies, that money does not have to rule the way sort of a commons has to work. And that was a really important thing to us. And, you know, we've done a number of different experimentations, some with just herbs and flowers, so you can smell and touch and taste. This was with very, very simple old bean cans. And what you're looking at on the side in every event that we would have in the Commons, people would write a letter to someone in the future or to someone that they didn't know, knowledge that they'd want to pass on. So we had this kind of growing catalogs of wisdom. So either a passerby could take a card off, or you could take a picture and remind yourself that there were these things that were possible in the future. We had about 70 rooftop garden beds that were made out of these old cardboard containers. And, you know, we realized very quickly in one season with very, very traditional growing methods that we could feed about 300 people for an entire season. And we began to think about ways that we could go from this idea of, you know, working from the inside out rather than the outside in, and try to understand how people work and how they began to kind of see themselves in this sort of new economy. And this is now inside the site, and we began to just use tape and create these three-dimensional spaces on these flat 2D surfaces where people could begin to draw and sketch what they thought these little garages could be. We also started to create these experiences that would allow all of us to kind of build confidence and connect with each other in really unexpected ways. We called these events mashups. And the mashups introduced the community to a lot of different ideas. So sort of like you would arrive at one of these mashup events and you'd have totally like no idea what to expect. So in this particular mashup, we worked with our local health clinic and offered free HPV vaccinations for teenagers. We taught folks how to connect their own rain barrels to their houses, had local artists, and then we offered free haircuts. And I'm just going to take you through a series of slides of some of the people that got their haircuts. It was just so beautiful to see and capture moments like these where you have multi-generations of women sharing stories about their life, their love, and health. For our younger community members, we create opportunities to extend learning about where our food comes from and use creative platforms to help youth express what they're learning and why. And so on one of the faces of the garages, we've created a fake cooking show so kids can kind of perform, learn how to chop vegetables, very simple recipes that they can kind of try on and make. And we run it with our iPhones so we can play back the videos for the kids, which they absolutely love. And the magic of growing in a public space allows us to introduce the basic tenets of eco-literacy in a really non-threatening way. As I mentioned before, we're really fortunate to sit across from a daycare, creating a healthy pipeline for lifelong learning. And in the back of this picture, we actually created a raised bed or a vertical bed for the kids made out of old soda containers. So they got to plant their own garden and water it every day and sort of take care of it. And then they would slowly trickle into the commons to help us water our vertical and raised beds, creating a really nice relationship between this other organization. We developed our own system for delivering food. We like to call ourselves the roaming gardeners. We walked a ton of miles, giving away over 267 bags of fresh produce. And the beauty of kind of, you know, getting up and meeting people where they are is that you realize very quickly that so few people have the ability to leave their homes. They're either taking care of a loved one, or sorry, there's someone with their microphone on that's really distracting. Is there any way we could turn that off? Sorry.
No worries. Good that you say so. I
Okay,
don't see anyone with their microphone on. If
just a lot of static. I don't know where it's coming from, but
yeah, I heard it too. But I don't see anyone. So if in some way I don't see it and you have your mic
okay.
on, please turn it off. But
Thank you.
then we'll resume. All right.
So this helps you when you realize that a lot of the design practice, it needs to happen where people are, and making sure that you're mindful to always keep that at the forefront of your practice, is that meet people where they are, not where you are. And this was a really invaluable lesson for us and has really helped inspire the way that we're thinking about the mobility of some of our future programming. So, after about 2 years of work, we really had to make a decision as a team to think about, what are we learning from all of these events? What are we learning from, the sort of growing conditions, the economic feasibility of a place like Latham Street, and who it was going to impact the most? And we had a lot of young adults that would sort of stop into the commons. Every other day they would be coming home from school. A lot of them didn't have a safe place to go home to, and they would stay and hang out, and they would want to learn new things. And it was just a wonderful place to start these conversations about, like, what happens when you turn 18 and you are going to be pushed out into adulthood, and you don't have an understanding of financial literacy. You have not learned how to be self-sufficient. And so we really began to think really seriously about what type of job training programs could we offer that would maybe focus directly on accessing these youth. And that's what we decided to do. So it was kind of radical, but we invited this group of teenagers. This was our first sort of cohort. This is about half of them. We had 10. And we spent about 8 weeks actually developing a prototype with them so that we could take all that information from our mashup events and start to formalize it. And it was sort of a crazy experience. All of a sudden, our little garages became little design incubators, or little garages where you could learn how to knead bread. You could learn how to grow different things. We introduced things like game design, finances, and budgeting. We talked a lot about this alternative forms of capital, mindfulness, food systems, worldview. And a lot of times, embedded in these experiences were opportunities to just talk and learn about issues of tolerance and race and equality and power, confirming this sort of sense of belonging and identity. And so a lot of activities that you might design in some of your design research, we started to do this alongside with the youth. So using a lot of our kind of arts background to develop experiences that gave them sort of confidence to have a sense of their self, but then also develop an awareness of others around them. And it was, kind of crazy, but just like our mashup events, we were looking at ways that teens could help us understand the common language between things like financial and kitchen literacy. Could they really think about things where they're learning about business, but they're also learning about the science of food safety? So, in a sense, putting them in this environment where there are many different ways that they could try on real world skills, real world behaviors, and help them kind of take control of their own story and imagine alternative possibilities for the future. Capturing moments like these, preparing a meal together, helping them build compassion for themselves and others. And so this work resulted in a place that we call the Night Owl Bakery. And the bakery becomes a driver in workforce development, career expansion, and also income. So participants that come into the bakery earn a living wage. And to date, we've been doing this now for about a year and a half, 2 years. We have been asking the participants to come in and continually design this program with us so that we figure out how to get it right. And we feel that we've kind of put forward this really bold vision to create a new type of programming which focuses on the positive change catalyzed when individuals work together within a caring, forward-thinking educational environment. It's a life readiness program for young adults who live in chronic poverty. And it's a program that combines food science with 21st century skills that promote societal and mental well-being. And it integrates the social, the ethical, the environmental concerns with various methodologies designed to establish a responsive, holistic mindset. The program aims to make participants more aware of the broader application of skills in various professional disciplines. So you could be learning how to use a drill, but you could be in a different lab learning how to make brownies and use a thermometer. And in the end, this wonderful place that we called Latham Street Commons really became this catalyst to design a program like the Night Owl Bakery. The Commons itself, we couldn't raise money to keep it going. It became sort of a wonderful platform to ask a lot of great questions about bringing ourselves together and connecting to those we don't typically connect with. So in closing, I just wanted to kind of emphasize that this type of design research as practice helps reveal and clarify collective assumptions about race, power, and privilege, building a foundation that enables authentic conversations and relationships. Enabling new ways to build trust with communities that are often not heard, and helping to reconnect people and systems so new types of opportunities are possible, breaking down barriers so learning and doing are happening side by side. Use this design research as practice to reveal hidden details about someone else's life story and build a common language and understanding of each other's differences. And I think most critical is pushing ourselves as designers to continually develop new ways to engage people, helping them identify the unique capacities that shape a community's identity. And with that, I will finish and take questions.
Wow, thank you so much. I think you can stop sharing your screen.
Yep.
First of all, thank you so much. I had so many times in your lecture that I find myself just smiling so broadly, and it really gave a very warm feeling. I feel like this is really a positive look at the problems we have today and how we can solve them, and how we can work on them. I think for me it was really positive message. And for everyone else, if you have a question, put it into the text channel or open your mic. And if no one has a question, then I have one.
Sure.
Yeah. So as I told you before, we're doing this online community now. I was wondering, what do you think is the impact of this crisis to communities? And maybe more relevant, how do you think we should deal with this?
I think we have to be incredibly vigilant about the communities that are being left behind in this crisis. I don't know about the situation in your in the Netherlands, but I look at our education system in the United States, and I think about all of the kids that are falling behind. You can kind of imagine places like the Commons that are looking to work with community members that are already struggling. They're in deep poverty. That now with COVID, you are thinking that technology solves everything, and there are many families that don't have Wi-Fi or high-speed internet. There are generations in the family that probably can't read or do math, and are running around trying to manage 3 jobs. So I feel that is going to be something that we're going to have to really tackle and think about, is the communities that are really going to fall behind, and how do we come together as a society to solve that problem. And it can be on some of the smallest levels, like volunteering to read to someone, to a family, and help them with their homework 3 nights a week. So understanding that we don't have to look at this huge, wicked problem and think that it seems seemingly impossible. There are often the smallest things that we can do as human beings, let alone, put the title designer on that, to make an impact. And I think that's where we have to kind of find the balance within ourselves to know what's important and what matters. I also think a lot of the COVID and looking at sort of isolation and loneliness, the rate of drug addiction, alcohol abuse, domestic abuse, child abuse, the numbers are soaring in those categories. So I think we're going to have a lot to kind of talk about and work through when we get to kind of the end of COVID, which, I hope will be soon. I think.
Yes, sorry.
I was going to say, I think for, all of us who live relatively privileged lives, just the opportunity to, have platforms like this where we can connect really openly and honestly and talk about some of these issues that we don't often talk about, and find ourselves vulnerable in those conversations, because we need to go deep, I think, to understand what's really going to happen in a couple of years.
Thank you. Yes, I think so too. I think it's a big question to ask ourselves, and also the message you give that we can start ourselves with small things, small human things. That would be really cool. I see that Chanman has a question. Chanman, do you want to open your mic? Otherwise, I can read your question out loud. Okay, so the question was, have you seen impact on crime numbers after these projects? So after the projects.
On crime?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but it's interesting. We did take a lot of photographs of, I was talking about the alleyways and often these kind of forgotten spaces. And we started taking pictures of garbage and really looking at the way neighbors started to manage their garbage around the commons. And, all of a sudden litter was being picked up, graffiti was being painted over, and the community was proud that, they had this beautiful living thing that they were now in the center of. And that was, I think, just a wonderful thing to see. We did not study crime.
Great. I think this already gives an image of how people treat their neighborhood. I think.
Yeah, and organizing garbage cans, that was one of our, when we first started the work, there was always garbage everywhere and trash cans just tipped over, and
right.
And slowly everything started to kind of be put away, and covers were on trash cans, and it was really pretty nice. And we also had neighbors that would come out and bring, peach cobbler, and they would show up at the mashup events as part of it. And so that was, I think, a sign that we were working in a good way, that made people feel included in something that was, not asked to come in. We sort of found our way in, and that's always a balance and a struggle, I think, when you work this way.
It's really cool to hear that you indeed can catalyze such a movement, so that you started and it's eventually spreads to the neighborhood, and it
Yeah,
eventually, yeah, becomes like intrinsic motivation to arrange all these kind of cool things.
yeah. I start with the octopus garden because I think that was the catalyst. And if you now begin to look and map, the streets around, we've connected everyone to rain barrels. There's a really nice sort of, we call them sort of like neighborhood champions, where people are looking out for one another. And I don't think we could have done the work at Latham Street Commons had the garden not established itself first.
Cool, great to hear. So it can start small.
Start small. Yeah.
I see that Sana had a question. Can I ask you to open your mic, Sana? I see you've opened your mic, but I can't hear you, Sana.
Sorry, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think it's really cool to hear that you can really you can really start so small and then really start doing, and that stuff really gets done instead of only thinking about big visions and big ambitious goals. So that really motivates me as well. But I'm wondering how could we, as students, without having lots of money and time to invest, how do you think we could do such a thing? Like, whom could we ask for help, and how did you, for example, do that?
So it's a really great question. Part of our struggle with all the projects is raising money. We have used a lot of crowdfunding campaigns. If you go on to Indiegogo and you search for the help save the octopus, we created the funniest video that everyone's like, you'll never get this funded. And within whatever it was, 3 weeks, we raised $12,000 to rebuild the artwork in the garden. I think the money is always an issue, and I will not sort of lie about that. But I think the thing that we learned the most about Latham Street is how much people waste and throw away. That, we could go to the Italian district and the guy that is giving away in his recycling bin 100 cans of, old cans from chickpeas, from the hummus that he makes, and he's just getting rid of them. And so, we went and used the chickpea cans. All the catalogs of wisdom were old library cards that a librarian gave to us. Clothes clips, going out and finding a lot of donations. And I think that's like the power of really good design, is to figure out what you're trying to communicate and capture that in a way that feels authentic and real to the people that you want to reach. And it could be a handwritten note, or it could be a little collage or a picture, or, like giving away a bag of lettuce. I mean, I cannot tell you, just kind of the gratitude that people felt with this offer of a gift. And that gift kind of opened the door up for just new possibilities. And so, a lot of the work that we were talking about through this kind of alternative economies is, and how the Night Owl Bakery operates now, is that we don't want your money, we want your intellectual capital. So if you're willing to come and give 2 hours to teach kids about financial literacy, that's more valuable to us than you writing a check for $200. And we work out of church basements. So the churches often, allow you free access to their community kitchens. So we've been, I think, really lucky and resourceful, but that has also been kind of our downfall, as we're really struggling to raise money. to keep things afloat. So you go through these waves. I think for students, like keeping it small so that you feel like you have an eye on, and I think Ezio Manzini, who runs DESIS, and you probably know a lot of his work, he talks a lot about these distributed networks. So if you can set a seed, like plant a seed for something to happen that's going to connect to something in a very unexpected way, you don't know who you're going to bump into in that kind of interaction. And I think starting is like the easiest thing. There's a really great story about a woman who was in a town in Philadelphia. She had very little money. She moved into this community and started going to recycling places and buying used paint. So she bought cans of used paint for $1. And she started painting the residents' doors. So every resident door had these bright colors. And so she kind of studied that. And she was like, I spent $10. And all of a sudden in 2 months, another resident has bought a flower and put flowers out front. People have painted their mailbox. So you never know what little thing you can do that's going to spark people to want to kind of be a part of the change. So doing is the most important thing, not sort of sitting back wondering what you should do, but finding it in a way to make it economical, but also meaningful for yourself. So that might have been a very long way to the answer, but I don't know if that helps. We also get funded by foundations. So we do get foundation grants, not big ones, but enough to kind of support one staff person and then be able to feed our kids.
Yeah, I think it's great. That was a great answer. Thank you.
It's a long answer, sorry. I think you're muted.
I was indeed. I see that Thijs has a question. Do you want to open your mic, Thijs?
Yes, I can.
Cool. You can also open your camera if you want.
Oh, yeah. Hi, this is me. So my question was, what is the importance of different levels of income households in such a community? And how do you make sure that there are different levels of income households within the within the community?
Mm-hmm. In our case, it's working really, really hard with local government to ensure that there are equitable housing communities that are established within these neighborhoods that are getting highly gentrified. There have been a number of studies. Pittsburg is one city that has done this, where they do a lot of mixed housing. So they will have people of low income and they will house them with people of middle income. And statistically, and you can look at the data, often that sort of relationship helps lift people out of poverty and actually helps establish a sense of like, you get up every day, you go to work. This is sort of how you become a kind of productive member of the community. We are in a really interesting place as a city, and I think Amsterdam and in Eindhoven, I think you probably all deal with the same thing, is that, many of you cannot afford to buy an apartment or a house, or it's controlled in some system that you're never going to have agency over. And, that happens a lot in the United States as well, especially with people of low income. And it is a challenge. And there are a lot of people that are trying to fight that and put pressure on corporations like Google, who came in and, overnight we have kind of the Google campus. And it was like, wait, how did that happen? And there's apartments, and it's like, did anyone ever ask Google, like, who's going to live in those apartments? And can they make sure that 30% are of the local community before kicking them out? But, that happened so quickly, and it seemed like such a, golden apple, and yet it really displaced a lot of people. And I think that's where we have to be really, really vigilant as community members and get on boards and and be really active with some of these policy issues to make sure that people aren't cut out. And I think that's, I look at your generation and I think this is an incredible role and responsibility that you need to be taking on, is figuring out where you have a voice in that.
Thank you.
And there are some really great examples. If you look at the work of Stefan Gruber, he's currently teaching at the School of Architecture here, but has come from Germany, has written a lot on the commons, and has a traveling exhibit that looks at many different groups around the world, and a lot of them are focusing in on housing and co-housing. So he could be a really interesting source for you, and I'm happy, Josephine, to send you a couple links.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Cool. Thanks for your question, Thijs. Can you also close your camera for now? Super. Okay, I had a short question from Jorg. Jorg, do you want to open your mic and your camera?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I had a question about the name of the Octopus Garden. I was wondering if it was a Beatles reference, possibly.
It was not a Beatles reference. It's really funny. So, I showed those pictures of what the garden was, and those were the first set of beds were the bricks that we used from the old building.
Oh, okay.
And then a very good friend of mine, her name is Laura Jean McLaughlin. She's a local artist. She said, 5 years ago, I made an octopus for the 9th hole of a putt-putt golf course for our arts festival. Pittsburgh has a huge arts festival. And she goes, and they're no longer going to store it. Do you want it in the garden? And I was like, yeah, sure.
Why not?
So we had an octopus in the garden. And since we have a new octopus, because the old one did eventually fall apart, and we raised funds to rebuild the new one. So that the crowdfunding campaign on Indiegogo that I pointed you to is talking about how sick the old octopus is and how we need to make her better.
Oh,
yeah,
that's really cute.
It's cute.
Really great. Is that a good answer?
Yeah.
It doesn't all have to be that serious.
No, not at all. But that's nice to see.
And actually, that's why I love Dutch design. Is that I think oftentimes, you bring in humor and life, and you create so many questions around, these interesting juxtapositions, and I really admire the sort of the thinking around of Dutch design. So.
Cool. Maybe we'll we'll also be responsible for that in the near future.
We'll have to see. But thanks for your answer.
Sure.
Okay, I have one last question, I think, from Simon. Simon, do you want to open your mic? I do hear something.
Yep. I can hear you. Hi there. Oh, no worries. I don't know if I have any good advice, but one thing that I think is important is that you establish a champion who's going to help kind of be the glue in any of your efforts. Oftentimes you have people that say, yeah, I want to be a part of it. And you realize without a strong champion that's helping to lead efforts and is checking in on things every day and making sure that, it's working the way that you're thinking about working, together as a group that, maybe that's you. And, think about the way that you go through the design process. So you might go through a very exploratory process where you plant little seeds. So, maybe you start putting little note cards under people's doors and asking people, like, what's important to you? Maybe you host a dinner, or you offer some sort of food exchange, and you start to kind of understand, what are the capacities of the community? What are they going to be willing to do or not willing to do? I also think you can develop some really interesting personas based on the people that are living there. So what are the personality types? How do you help people establish roles and know that they're responsible and that their role really matters in terms of how this community works? So, think about what you learn as a designer and how that could be applied to, your own circumstances and situations. I think you'll learn a ton from that. Does that help at all? But do it as a little study. You can do all these little trials, and you could just say every week, maybe for 8 weeks, you design these little things and you see what sticks. It's almost like you take a big bowl of spaghetti and you throw it against the wall, and which pieces stay on the wall. And then start establishing, some rules and understanding of what it means, and then bring people in so that it's they feel like they're part of the collaborative effort. So two different ways. I emphasize with my students, it's so important not to underestimate the power of a platform like this, where you are just connecting with each other, socially talking. You're not touching, you're not smelling, you're not tasting, but you are connecting on some level. And it's really, really important, especially as we move into the darker days with the season. Depression is real, and we need to be really mindful of the friends that you see slipping a little bit, and you're kind of studying their online environment and what's behind them, and they haven't made their bed or washed their hair or done anything, and that we are hyper conscious of the detail in these spaces, so that we know we got to really look out for this person. From kind of a teaching perspective, we've been doing some really interesting work using Figma, Miro, Mural. So creating sort of these very, kind of collaborative workspaces where, you can jump in and be working, remotely, but also collaboratively. It's not ideal, but it actually, it's kind of been a nice way for students to see kind of the value of what they would do on a whiteboard in the studio versus something that they can do to sitting together and talking in a breakout room. From a research perspective, I spent the summer working on a health project out of UCLA, and we did a lot of work where we would do a lot of the facilitation, so using a program like Miro or Figma and creating cards and you know, kind of games that people could talk through. So that kind of traditional method of like talk out loud, that you can begin to use that platform to kind of facilitate conversations that are not people physically touching a button, holding a card, filling out something, but they are talking with you. And that, I think, you know, it just emphasizes, you know, I think I said it earlier, is like it's our role is to figure out how to communicate really well and efficiently and effectively so that people understand what you're trying to do. And I think that's been one of our biggest challenges, is getting everyone to slow down long enough to be like, all right, we can't throw it all in this way. This is gonna be a much slower process. But we can't stop asking some of the hard questions and being really engaged with, you know, things that are happening in particular around Black Lives Matter, around, you know, some of the environmental issues that are happening, that we can't stop talking about it, because when COVID ends and we're allowed to be working in the way that we like to work, we've got to be ready to go.
I think you touch on like so many very important points here, right? Like it's like one is the new, like this is our kind of new normal right now, right? So like the ideal is gone, and we have to figure out like ways of how to make it work. And some of them are really around like slowing down, learning to be explicit with each other, right? Like being like asking maybe one question too many if we see like others are not doing well. Like I can only emphasize like, all right, depression is really real. Loneliness is very real. Like the disconnect that we all kind of experiencing right now by not being able to be close to each other anymore is very real and is impacting all of us. And I think like these examples or perspectives that you are opening up there, I think they're really helpful, like for kind of moving forward and trying to build this, like rebuild at least parts of it, right? Mm-hmm. And the other, I think, like very important perspective here is this kind of we can't stop talking about important matters, right? Like you're absolutely right. Like it's so easy to kind of in this context to kind of withdraw, take a step back and try to make everything really easy, but we need to keep on talking on them, because else we can't work, think, and express ourselves like in this context to really make progress. So thank you very much. Like it's a fantastic perspective there. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, it was really lovely to meet all of you. And again, Max, I said it earlier, thank you for the invitation. It's really, really wonderful to learn from all of you as well. So thank you.
Yeah, I guess that's right. We can look at the positive side. Like it's a little easier to make like these kind of like connections happen. So that's I guess like a positive in there. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. I think Josephine should have the last word. I don't wanna kind of
Hey, sorry, I
hijack the
think
conversation.
my Wi-Fi just got cut up. Thank you so much, Kristin. Does anyone else has a question?
You have my email, so I'm more than happy to answer anything via email. And I'll send a couple links based on the questions that some of you asked that might be helpful resources.
That's super great. I see that Sanna is still typing. You can also open your mic if it's a question, Sanna. She said, thank you very much. It was really inspiring, and I feel motivated to do small, good things for others.
Take a picture and send it to me.
I will send a picture.
Share it with your friends. That's how it happens. We can only encourage one another.
I see a lot of people who agree with this. So that's great.
All right, I'll do something today and send it to you as well.
Great. Then thank you so much for being here. I was honored to being able to host this talk, and thank you all also for taking the time to listen. and we'll see you soon. Have a good day, because for you, you have the whole day in front of you. I think for us, it's already getting a bit dark outside.
Yeah, lucky. Bye-bye.
All right, bye. Thank you so much. Ciao.